Madelyn woke in the Pack hospital to the scent of wolfsbane antiseptic and the distant murmur of healers moving through the corridors. Her ribs screamed with every shallow breath, a sharp reminder of Thomas's claws raking across her torso 6 hours earlier. The fight had been about nothing, everything. The usual pattern: dinner served too cold, a smile she'd given the grocer he decided was too friendly, his voice rising while hers disappeared entirely. Diana whimpering from her small room at the end of the hall, then his fists, his wolf strength behind every blow. She tried to sit up and nearly blacked out from the pain radiating through her chest. The healer had said 4 ribs, possibly 5, fractured or cracked. Rest, herbal compresses, pain tonics the Pack hospital would bill her cottage wages for. She'd signed herself out against the healer's orders because the cost was already past 2 weeks' salary, and every minute in this bed added charges she'd never pay off. Her phone sat on the small metal table beside the narrow cot, screen dark. She grabbed it with trembling fingers and pressed the power button. 12:47 a.m. Her shift at the palace started at 5 in the morning, and she needed to be there. 7 years she'd worked for Alpha King Connor Ashwood. 7 years of steady wages that kept her and Diana in the small cottage on palace grounds, kept food on their table, kept them surviving within the relative safety of being palace staff. Missing a single shift without notice would be grounds for immediate dismissal. She knew the rules. Everyone knew the rules. Welcome back, my amazing viewers. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories reach. All right, settle in, take a breath, and let's get back to it. She tried calling home. The phone rang 8 times before going to voicemail. Panic clawed at her throat, sharper than the pain in her ribs. She tried again. Nothing. Where was Diana? A different healer appeared in the doorway, wooden clipboard in hand, exhausted eyes scanning the runes on her chart. You really shouldn't be trying to leave yet, Mrs. Rivers. The head healer wants to observe you for at least another 6 hours. Possible internal injuries. I need to go home. Madelyn's voice came out rough, damaged. My daughter is alone. Your daughter left about 2 hours ago. The healer's tone was matter-of-fact, unconcerned. Said she was going back to your cottage to get some things and would return before dawn. Ice flooded Madelyn's veins, colder than any winter in the Northern Territories. She left? She's 14. You let a 14-year-old leave the hospital alone after midnight? The healer's expression tightened defensively. She said your neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, was waiting outside to walk her home and bring you clean clothes. The girl was calm, coherent, and very insistent. Was I supposed to physically restrain a Pack member's child? Madelyn was already pulling the IV needle from her arm, ignoring the healer's protests, ignoring the way the room tilted dangerously when she stood. Diana didn't have a neighbor escort arranged. Diana had lied to get out of the hospital, which meant she had a plan, which meant something had gone terribly, horribly wrong. The healer moved to block her path. Mrs. Rivers, you're in no condition to move. If those ribs puncture a lung. I need to find my daughter. Madelyn didn't recognize her own voice. It sounded feral, desperate, the voice of a mother whose wolf was clawing to the surface despite her weakness. The healer stepped aside, still protesting, but Madelyn was already stumbling toward the corridor, one hand pressed against her damaged ribs, the other clutching her phone like it might suddenly provide answers. She tried Diana again as she pushed through the hospital's front entrance into the cold night air. Voicemail. She tried their cottage. Nothing. Then her brain caught up with her panic, and she realized with horrible, perfect clarity where Diana had gone. She'd gone to work for her. The Royal Moonstone Palace sat at the heart of the Pack's territory, all ancient stone and silver gates and power that radiated through the very ground. Madelyn had walked those paths for 7 years, knew every servant's entrance, every protocol, every rule about unauthorized presence in the king's residence after midnight. Diana knew them too, because Madelyn had warned her again and again, Never go to the palace alone. Never draw the Alpha King's attention. Stay invisible. Stay safe. And now her brilliant, stubborn, loyal daughter had done exactly what Madelyn had forbidden, slipping into the palace kitchens in the dead of night to scrub floors and save her mother's job. Madelyn ran. Every step sent agony through her broken ribs. The cold air burned her lungs. She took the forest path, shorter, faster, used only by staff who knew the territory. Her wolf whimpered inside her, too weak to shift, too damaged to protect. The palace loomed ahead, lit by scattered torches and the full moon overhead. The servants' entrance was locked, but Madelyn still had her key. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to fit it into the lock. The kitchen would be empty at this hour. The Alpha King would be asleep in his private wing. Diana would be alone, working, trying to be invisible. But as Madelyn pushed through the heavy wooden door and stumbled into the palace's stone corridor, she heard voices, low, careful, coming from the direction of the main kitchens. One voice she didn't recognize, young, frightened, trying to sound brave. Diana. And the other voice, deep and commanding, edged with something Madelyn had never heard in all her years of service. The Alpha King himself, awake, discovering her daughter in his kitchen at 3 a.m. Madelyn's blood turned to ice as she forced her broken body to move faster, racing toward the sound of her daughter's voice and praying to the moon goddess that Diana's courage and her own desperation hadn't just destroyed them both. Connor Ashwood couldn't sleep. Again. He stood at the window of his private study, watching moonlight paint silver across the palace grounds, and wondered when the weight of the crown had started feeling like a noose. 300 years his bloodline had ruled the Moonstone Pack. 300 years of tradition, duty, and the kind of loneliness that came from being untouchable. He should be reviewing territory disputes, should be sleeping. Should be anything other than what he was, restless, prowling his own halls like a caged wolf at 2 a.m. The palace was silent. His beta, Marcus, had retired hours ago. The night guards were stationed at their posts. The staff had long since finished their duties and returned to their quarters. This was Connor's favorite time, when he could pretend he was just a man walking through an empty house instead of an Alpha King carrying the fate of 10,000 wolves on his shoulders. He descended the main staircase, his footfalls silent on ancient stone. He'd walk the perimeter, check the wards himself, maybe shift and run the forest boundaries until exhaustion finally claimed him. But as he passed the corridor leading to the kitchens, he heard it, the soft splash of water, the quiet clatter of dishes. Connor went still. Every instinct sharpened. No one should be in the kitchens at this hour. The night staff didn't start until 4, and even then they worked in the preparation areas, not the main washing stations. He moved silently, centuries of predator genetics making him a ghost in his own halls. The kitchen door stood partially open, warm light spilling into the corridor. He could smell soap, lemon oil, and beneath it, fear. Fresh, acrid human fear from someone trying desperately to hide it. Connor pushed the door open slowly. A girl stood at the massive stone sink, her back to him, scrubbing a copper pot with hands that shook so badly the water sloshed over the rim. She was thin, too thin, wearing clothes that hung loose on her frame. Dark hair fell in a tangled curtain down her back, and even from behind, Connor could see the exhaustion in every line of her small body. She couldn't be more than 14. "Who are you?" His voice came out softer than he'd intended, but the girl still flinched so violently she nearly dropped the pot. She spun around, and Connor's breath caught. Her face was pale, eyes too large, dark circles beneath them speaking of sleepless nights and chronic fear. But it was her arms that made Connor's wolf surge forward with a snarl he had to physically swallow back. Bruises. Purple and yellow, covering both forearms in distinctive patterns. Defensive wounds. The kind that came from raising your arms to protect your face, your body, from someone else's fists. I'm sorry, Alpha King," The girl's voice trembled. She set the pot down carefully and pressed her bruised arms behind her back, trying to hide them. I'm Diana. Diana Rivers. My mother is Madelyn. She's one of your housekeepers. She was hurt yesterday and couldn't make her shift, and I thought I could help. I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll leave right now. Please don't fire her. Please, she needs this job, and it's my fault she got hurt and— Stop! Connor held up one hand, and the girl's desperate words cut off mid-sentence. He could hear her heart hammering, could smell the terror rolling off her in waves. She thought he was angry, thought he'd punish her for trying to save her mother's job. He forced his voice into something gentle, something that wouldn't terrify her further. Diana, I'm not going to fire your mother. I'm not angry with you. He took one careful step forward, the way he might approach a wounded animal. But I need you to answer some questions. Can you do that? She nodded, eyes locked on the floor. Look at me, please. Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her gaze to his. Connor kept his expression neutral, his wolf locked down tight, even as rage began building in his chest like molten silver. Those bruises on your arms, he said quietly. How did you get them? Diana's chin trembled. I fell. Don't. The word came out sharper than he intended, and he immediately softened his tone. Diana, I've been an alpha for 80 years. I know what defensive wounds look like. I need the truth. The girl's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Thomas, my mother's mate, he was hitting her, yesterday. I tried to stop him and She held out her arms, showing the full extent of the bruising. He told me to stay out of it, that she deserved it for being disrespectful. Then he left, and Mama was bleeding, and I called the PAC hospital, but they said she'd be okay. But then she signed herself out because she was scared of losing her job here, and she came home to rest. But I knew if she missed her shift, you'd replace her, and we'd have to leave the cottage, and then Thomas could— She broke off, sobbing now, and Connor's legendary control, the iron discipline that had defined his reign, shattered like glass. His wolf roared inside him, demanding blood, demanding justice, demanding he find this Thomas Kane and rip his throat out for touching what was his to protect. Because that's what they were, what all his pack members were supposed to be. His to protect. And he'd failed. Someone had been suffering under his own roof, in his own territory, and he hadn't known. Connor pulled out his phone with hands that didn't shake only through sheer force of will. Marcus, I need you in the main kitchen, now, and send someone to find Madelyn Rivers, immediately. He ended the call and crouched down to Diana's level, careful to keep distance between them so she wouldn't feel threatened. Diana, you and your mother are under my protection now. Do you understand? No one is going to hurt either of you again, not Thomas, not anyone. The girl stared at him with disbelieving eyes. But the mate bond— I don't care about the mate bond, Connor said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I care that a child in my pack is covered in defensive wounds and her mother is in a hospital bed because of a male who thinks power gives him ownership. He stood, pulling out his phone again. Anthony, prepare the East Wing guest suite. 2 occupants, full medical team standing by. He paused, then added, and find me everything we have on Thomas Kane. Employment, residence, pack status, everything. Behind him, the kitchen door burst open. Madelyn Rivers stumbled through, her face white with pain and terror, one hand pressed to her ribs, the other reaching for her daughter. Madelyn's legs gave out the moment she saw Diana, but strong hands caught her before she hit the stone floor. The Alpha King held her with surprising gentleness, supporting her weight as her broken ribs screamed in protest. Easy, Connor murmured, and his voice held none of the cold authority she'd expected. I've got you! Diana, Madelyn gasped, reaching for her daughter even as the room spun dangerously. I'm okay, Mama. Diana was there suddenly, taking her hand, and Madelyn could see the tear tracks on her face, the bruises on her arms that made her want to vomit. "The Alpha King, he's not angry, he's helping us." Madelyn didn't understand, couldn't understand. She'd violated protocol, her daughter had trespassed, they should be dismissed, thrown out, sent back to… "Mrs. Rivers." The Alpha King's voice cut through her spiraling panic. "You're injured. Your daughter is exhausted and traumatized. We can discuss everything else later, but right now I need you to let me help you. Can you do that?" Madelyn found herself nodding, too confused and in too much pain to do anything else. The next hour passed in a blur. The Alpha King, Connor, he insisted quietly, carried her through corridors she'd only ever cleaned. Diana trailing behind them with a massive wolf she dimly recognized as Beta Marcus. They arrived at a suite in the East Wing, the royal guest quarters, rooms reserved for visiting alphas and dignitaries. "This is too much," Madelyn tried to protest as Connor settled her onto a bed that felt like sleeping on clouds. "We can't. I'm just a maid." "You're a member of my pack who's been hurt," Connor said, his tone allowing no argument. "And right now, that's all that matters." The royal healers arrived within minutes. 3 of them, including the head healer herself, an ancient wolf named Alara who'd served Connor's father before him. They examined Madelyn with practiced efficiency while Connor stood by the window, his back to them, but his attention clearly focused on every word they spoke. 5 fractured ribs, severe bruising to the torso and back, suspected internal bleeding that's thankfully minimal, Alara reported clinically. She needs at least 2 weeks of bed rest and regular healing sessions. The damage is consistent with a sustained physical assault by someone with significant strength advantage. "How long has this been happening?" Connor's question was directed at Madelyn, his voice carefully controlled. Madelyn looked at Diana, who'd been given tea and bread by a kind-faced servant, and was now curled in a chair, trying not to fall asleep. She didn't want to answer, didn't want to admit how weak she'd been, how long she'd endured, how thoroughly she'd failed to protect her daughter. 2 years, she whispered finally. "Since Thomas claimed the mate bond was permanent, and I had no right to refuse him." Something dangerous flickered across Connor's face, there and gone in an instant. "Get some rest, Mrs. Rivers. We'll talk more tomorrow." He moved toward the door, pausing to speak with Marcus in low tones. Madelyn caught fragments. "Full security on this wing. Find Kane's location. I want every pack member who reports to him questioned." Then Connor's voice rose slightly, pitched to carry through the entire suite, through the door to where guards were undoubtedly stationed, through the walls themselves, it seemed. "Madelyn Rivers and her daughter Diana are under my personal protection as of this moment. Anyone who wishes to dispute that can bring their concerns directly to me. Spread the word." It wasn't a request, it was a decree, spoken with the absolute authority of an Alpha King who expected immediate obedience. Madelyn felt something shift in the air, the weight of pack bonds recognizing a direct command from their leader. Marcus nodded once and left. Connor followed, but not before meeting Madelyn's eyes one last time. "Sleep. You're safe here. Both of you." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Madelyn sat in the enormous bed, Diana now asleep in the chair despite her best efforts to stay awake, and tried to process what had just happened. She'd expected dismissal, expected anger at the disruption, at Diana's unauthorized presence, at the scandal of a maid bringing her personal problems into the Alpha King's household. Instead, she'd been carried to the royal wing, treated by the head healer herself, given protection by direct decree from the most powerful wolf in the territory. She should sleep. The healing tonics were already pulling her under, her body desperate for rest. It had been denied for months, but as her eyes drifted closed, she could have sworn she heard something, the soft sound of someone settling against the wall just outside their door. A guard, she thought dimly. Connor had posted guards, but when she woke briefly an hour later, Confused by pain and unfamiliar surroundings, she caught the scent drifting under the door. Not a guard. The Alpha King himself, keeping watch through the darkest hours of the night, ensuring that the woman and child under his protection remained safe. Madelyn didn't understand it. Didn't understand why someone with Connor Ashwood's power and status would personally stand vigil outside a maid's door. But as she drifted back into healing sleep, with Diana breathing softly nearby, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Safe. 3 weeks into her stay in the East Wing, Madelyn woke without pain for the first time in years. She lay still for a moment, testing her ribs with careful breaths, waiting for the familiar stab of agony. Nothing. Just the pleasant ache of bones knitting properly, muscles healing without fresh damage to undo the progress. The morning sun streamed through windows she'd once cleaned from the outside, and she could hear Diana laughing in the sitting room. Laughing. When was the last time her daughter had laughed? Madelyn rose slowly. Pulling on the soft robe that had appeared in the wardrobe, along with other clothes in her exact size. Everything in this suite felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The bed that didn't sag, the bath that produced hot water without coaxing, the meals that arrived 3 times daily without her having to beg or budget, the strangeness of safety. She found Diana at the small table by the window, a chessboard between her and Connor Ashwood. The Alpha King was studying the board with the same intensity she'd seen him use reviewing territorial maps, while Diana gnawed her bottom lip in concentration. "If you move your knight there," Connor said quietly, "you'll leave your queen exposed. But if I don't, you'll take my rook." Diana's hand hovered over the piece. "True. So the question is, which loss can you better afford?" Madelyn must have made some sound, because Connor's gaze lifted to her, and something shifted in his expression. Not the careful neutrality he showed most pack members, but something warmer, almost pleased. "Mrs. Rivers, you're looking stronger." "Madelyn," she heard herself say. "You can call me Madelyn." The words hung in the air between them, significant in ways she couldn't quite name. Pack hierarchy dictated formality between ranks, especially between an Alpha King and a maid, but nothing about the past 3 weeks had followed normal protocol. "Madelyn," Connor repeated, and her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Then you should call me Connor, at least in private." Diana moved her knight, sacrificing it to save her queen, and grinned when Connor nodded approval. "Better. You're learning to think 3 moves ahead." This had become their routine, Madelyn had discovered. Connor appeared most mornings during Diana's lessons, bringing books from his private library, histories of the pack, tales of other territories, even human novels Diana devoured eagerly. He taught her chess, answered her questions about pack politics with surprising patience, and never once made her feel foolish for asking. He was teaching her daughter that men could be safe. "I brought something for you as well," Connor said, producing a leather-bound volume from beside his chair. "Marcus mentioned you helped organize the palace library years ago. I thought you might enjoy seeing the collection again. As a reader, not a cleaner." The book was a rare history of the northern packs, something Madelyn had glimpsed only once while dusting the restricted section. She took it with trembling hands. "I couldn't. This is too valuable." "It's a book. It's meant to be read." Connor stood, and she was struck again by the sheer presence of him, not just his physical size, but the controlled power that seemed to radiate from him like heat. "Besides, I was hoping you might help catalog some of the older texts. The current librarian is overwhelmed, and you have an eye for organization he lacks." It wasn't charity, she realized. He was offering her purpose, a role that used her mind rather than just her hands, a position that didn't require her to be invisible. "I'd like that," she managed. Over the following days, Madelyn spent her mornings in the library, losing herself in the smell of old paper and leather bindings. Connor appeared periodically, ostensibly checking on her progress, but their conversations drifted beyond books. He told her about the weight of inheriting the crown at 25, when rogues killed his parents during a territorial dispute, how he'd learned to rule with an iron fist because showing softness meant inviting challenges to his authority. "But you showed Diana softness," Madelyn observed one afternoon as they worked side by side, cataloging a collection of ancient pact treaties. Connor was quiet for a long moment. "I showed her honesty," he said finally. "She'd already seen the worst of what strength without honor looks like. She didn't need me to be hard. She needed me to be fair." "And me?" The question escaped before Madelyn could stop it. "What did I need?" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his amber eyes made her breath catch. "Safety. Real safety, not the illusion of it you'd been surviving on. And time to heal without fear of what comes next." "Thomas won't stop," she whispered. The fear still lived in her chest, even in this beautiful room with sunlight streaming through the windows. "The mate bond can be severed by an Alpha King's decree in cases of abuse," Connor interrupted quietly. "It's ancient law, rarely invoked, but absolute. I've been building the case for weeks. Medical records, Diana's testimony, witness statements from your former neighbors who heard the fights but were too afraid to intervene." His jaw tightened. "When he comes, and he will, I'll be ready." Madelyn's eyes burned with sudden tears. "Why? Why would you do all this for us?" Connor reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand covered hers on the desk between them. His touch was warm, careful, nothing like Thomas's grabbing fingers. "Because I spent 80 years ruling by fear and duty, thinking that was strength," he said softly. "Then a child showed up in my kitchen at 3 a.m, bruised and terrified, trying to save her mother's job. And I realized I'd built a kingdom where people were too afraid to ask their king for help." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I don't want to rule that way anymore. I want to build something better, something where a woman like you doesn't have to bleed in silence because she thinks no one cares enough to stop it." Madelyn stared at their joined hands, at the careful way he held her, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but blooming, the terrifying, impossible beginning of trust, of hope. The warning came through Marcus at dinner 6 weeks after that first night. Madelyn was helping Diana with her reading in the library when the beta appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "He's here, at the main gates." Madelyn didn't need to ask who. Her hands went numb, the book sliding from her fingers. She'd known this moment would come, had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and devastating. "Mama?" Diana's voice was small, frightened, and Madelyn hated that her daughter recognized that look on her face, the look that meant Thomas had found them. "Stay here with Diana," Marcus said, his tone gentle but firm. "Connor's handling it." But Madelyn was already standing, already moving toward the window that overlooked the front gates. She could see him from here. Thomas Kane, all coiled violence and self-righteous fury, flanked by 2 of his enforcer friends, and Connor, standing alone on the other side of the iron gates, a deliberate barrier between Thomas and the palace, between Thomas and her. Even from this distance, she could hear Thomas's voice carrying across the grounds, loud enough to ensure witnesses. "I'm here for my mate. You have no right to keep her from me. The bond is sacred, permanent under pack law. You know this, Ashwood." Connor's response was quieter, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "I know the law. I also know it allows for severance in cases of sustained abuse. Madelyn Rivers has chosen sanctuary, and I've granted it." "Sanctuary?" Thomas laughed. And the sound made Madelyn's skin crawl. "She's confused, traumatized. She doesn't know what she wants. The bond was claimed under duress when she was 19 and grieving her parents' deaths," Connor interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You took advantage of a vulnerable young woman and called it fate. That's not a bond. That's ownership. And I don't recognize it." Madelyn's breath caught. Connor knew. Somehow he'd found out about that terrible year when she'd been alone and drowning in grief, when Thomas had appeared offering protection and stability, when he'd invoked the mate bond claim before she'd understood what it would mean. She'd been 19, orphaned, desperate. Thomas had been 28, established, confident. He'd said the moon goddess had chosen them, that rejecting a true mate bond would curse her. She'd believed him because she hadn't known any better, because the alternative was being completely alone. By the time she'd learned he'd lied, that his mate bond was nothing but a claim he'd filed with the Pack Council, while she was too grief-stricken to think clearly, she was already pregnant with Diana, already trapped. "You can't just decide Pack law doesn't apply to you," Thomas was saying, his voice rising. "The Council will back me on this. Elder Garrett, Elder Morrison, they believe in the sanctity of mate bonds. They'll force you to return her." "Will they?" Connor's tone could have frozen fire. "We'll see." Marcus touched Madelyn's shoulder gently. "He can't get past the gates without Connor's permission. You're safe." But she wasn't. Not really. Because Thomas was right about one thing. The Pack Council's elder members were traditionalists who believed mate bonds were inviolable regardless of circumstances. She'd heard the whispers over the years, the way they spoke about females who tried to leave their mates. Difficult, ungrateful, hysterical. "They'll make me go back," Madelyn whispered, and the panic was rising in her throat like bile. "The elders, Pack law says a lot of things." Connor's voice came from behind her, and she spun to find him in the doorway. When had he left the gates? "Including that an Alpha King's word supersedes council recommendations in matters of Pack member safety." Thomas must have been escorted away because Connor was here now, crossing the library to stand before her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the barely leashed fury that made his wolf visible in his eyes. "He claimed you when you were grieving and alone," Connor said quietly. "Filed the bond paperwork while you were too traumatized to understand what it meant. That's not a bond recognized by the moon goddess. That's a legal manipulation. But the council can bring their objections to me directly." His voice hardened. "I am the law in this pack, Madelyn. Not tradition. Not the elders' interpretation of ancient customs. Me. And I say you're free." Madelyn stared at him, wanting desperately to believe. "What if you're wrong? What if they overrule you?" "They can't." Connor's certainty was absolute. "An Alpha King's authority in protection matters is unconditional. It's written in the founding laws, the ones that predate the council itself. They can disapprove, they can argue, but they cannot force me to return you to an abusive mate, and they cannot punish you for accepting sanctuary I've granted." He took a careful step closer, his voice dropping. "Thomas will fight this. He'll call council meetings, invoke every traditional law he can find, try to make this about bond sanctity instead of abuse. It's going to get ugly before it gets better." "I know," Madelyn whispered, "but I need you to trust me." Connor's amber eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "I will not let him take you. I will not let pack politics or traditionalist elders force you back into a situation where you and Diana are in danger. I promise you this on my crown, on my life. You are under my protection, and that means something." Madelyn found herself nodding, even as tears spilled down her cheeks. Because what choice did she have? Thomas knew where they were now. He would use every tool at his disposal, pack law, council politics, the sacred bond claim, to force her back under his control. Her only hope was the dangerous, powerful male standing before her, the Alpha King who'd found her daughter in his kitchen and decided to care. "Okay," she breathed. "I trust you." Connor's expression softened fractionally. "Then let me handle Thomas. You focus on healing, on helping Diana heal. Let me carry this weight." For the first time in 2 years, Madelyn let herself lean on someone else's strength and prayed to the moon goddess it would be enough. Diana had wanted to retrieve her journals from the cottage, just her journals. The ones where she'd been documenting her thoughts for the pack counselor, practicing the coping strategies they'd discussed. Madelyn had hesitated, but Marcus had assured her the cottage was still under palace surveillance, that Thomas wouldn't dare approach it knowing guards were watching. They'd been wrong. Madelyn was in the library cataloging a collection of lunar ceremony texts when she heard the commotion. Running footsteps in the corridor, Marcus's voice sharp with command, and then, "Mama!" Diana burst through the library door, her face streaked with tears, Marcus right behind her. And Madelyn saw it immediately. Fresh bruises blooming dark purple on her daughter's forearm, finger-shaped marks that made her vision tunnel with rage and terror. "He was there!" Diana gasped, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Thomas was in the cottage. He grabbed me when I came out of my room. He said I had to tell him how to get to you, that you belonged to him, that the Alpha King had no right. Did he hurt you?" Madelyn was already pulling Diana close, examining her arms with hands that trembled with fury. "Did he—" "I got away." Diana's voice cracked. "I used the move Connor taught me, the one where you twist and drop your weight, and I ran. Marcus was coming up the path and Thomas disappeared into the woods." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry. I just wanted my journals. I didn't think— This isn't your fault." Madelyn pulled her daughter against her chest, felt Diana's rabbit-quick heartbeat, and something inside her shifted. Not breaking, but crystallizing into perfect cold clarity. She'd spent 2 years trying to minimize, trying to survive, trying to keep Diana safe through invisibility and submission. She'd told herself that enduring was strength, that protecting Diana meant absorbing Thomas's violence so it didn't touch her daughter. But Thomas had touched Diana anyway, had grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises, had cornered a 14-year-old girl and tried to use her as leverage, and Madelyn was done. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been in years. "Where is Connor?" "His study." "But Madelyn, he's with the council elders. I don't care." She stood, keeping Diana close. "Take us to him, now." Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "This way." The walk to Connor's study felt both endless and too short. Madelyn could hear raised voices before they reached the door, Elder Garrett's imperious tone insisting that traditional bonds must be respected, and Connor's measured responses that barely concealed his anger. Marcus knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for permission. Connor's study was large and austere, all dark wood and territorial maps. 3 elderly wolves sat in chairs facing Connor's desk, the council elders, their disapproval written clearly on their faces. Connor stood behind his desk, and when his gaze landed on Madelyn, then dropped to Diana's bruised arm, his expression went absolutely cold. "We'll continue this discussion later," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Gentlemen, get out." Elder Garrett drew himself up indignantly. "Alpha King, we are in the middle of— Out!" The word carried the full weight of an alpha command, and all 3 elders flinched. They filed out reluctantly, shooting curious glances at Madelyn and Diana as they passed. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Connor was around his desk in 3 strides, crouching to Diana's level. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Diana shook her head mutely, and Connor's jaw tightened as he examined the bruises without touching them. Then he rose, his attention shifting to Madelyn, and she saw the question in his eyes, the careful restraint of a predator waiting to be unleashed. "I need to ask you something," Madelyn said, and her voice didn't shake, didn't waver. "And I need you to answer honestly." Connor nodded once. "Can you end this, permanently?" She held his gaze, letting him see everything she'd kept hidden, the fear, the rage, the absolute determination to protect her daughter at any cost. "Not just send him away. Not just legal barriers or council politics. Can you use your power as Alpha King to make Thomas Kane disappear from our lives forever? Something dangerous flickered in Connor's eyes. Yes. Then I'm asking you to do it. Madelyn took a step closer, Diana still pressed against her side. I know what I'm asking. I know what it means to ask the most dangerous wolf in the kingdom to use that danger on my behalf. I know you've been trying to do this legally, properly, through council channels, but he just cornered my daughter in our old cottage and left bruises on her arms. Her voice dropped to something fierce and deadly. So I'm done being patient. I'm done waiting for pack politics to resolve this. Use your power, end this, make him go away and never come back. The air in the study felt electric, charged with the weight of what she was asking. This wasn't a request for sanctuary anymore. This was asking an Alpha King to exercise his absolute authority, to bend or break whatever laws necessary to permanently remove a threat. Connor studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone, his movements deliberate and controlled. Marcus, get me Thomas Kane's current location. I don't care if you have to track him through 3 territories. Find him. He paused. And convene an emergency council session for tomorrow evening. Full formal protocol. I'm invoking Supreme Alpha Right. He ended the call and turned back to Madelyn. Supreme Alpha Right is the oldest law in our pack. It allows me to nullify any bond, strip any rank, and exile or execute any wolf who threatens those under my direct protection. The council can't overrule it. No one can. His voice dropped. I've been building a legal case because I wanted to give you justice through proper channels. But if you're asking me to use my absolute power instead— I am, Madelyn interrupted. I'm asking you to be the dangerous thing everyone fears. Just this once. For us. Connor's expression shifted into something that would have terrified her 8 weeks ago. The cold, ruthless authority of an Alpha King who'd ruled for 80 years and never lost a challenge. Consider it done. The council chamber was circular, designed so every member could see the Alpha King's throne at its center. Ancient pack law dictated that Supreme Alpha Right invocations be witnessed by the full council, all ranked wolves above enforcer level, and any pack member who wished to attend. The chamber was packed. Madelyn stood in the witness section with Diana pressed against her side, Marcus a silent sentinel behind them. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes, hear the whispered speculation. The mate bond severance hadn't been invoked in this pack for over 40 years, and never by Connor during his reign. Thomas stood in the accused circle, flanked by guards, his expression caught between rage and disbelief. He'd cleaned up for this, wore his enforcer dress uniform, had his hair tied back properly. Playing the wronged mate, the misunderstood husband. It made Madelyn sick. Connor entered last, and the chamber fell silent. He wore formal robes she'd only seen in portraits, deep black with silver threading that caught the light like moonlight on water. The crown of the Moonstone Pack sat on his head, ancient silver worked into a design of wolves and lunar phases. He looked every inch the king his bloodline had produced for 3 centuries. He looked absolutely terrifying. This council is convened under Supreme Alpha Right, Connor's voice carried through the chamber without him raising it. I present evidence of sustained abuse, fraudulent bond claiming, and direct threat to pack members under my protection. The accused is Thomas Kane, Enforcer 3rd Class. What followed was methodical and devastating. Connor presented medical records spanning 2 years, broken ribs, fractured wrists, concussions. The head healer testified about Madelyn's injuries, about Diana's defensive wounds. Marcus read witness statements from neighbors who'd heard the fights, the screams, Thomas's threats. Diana's testimony was brief but damning. She spoke clearly despite her trembling voice, describing the beatings, the terror, the night Thomas had cornered her in the cottage and grabbed her hard enough to bruise. Through it all, Thomas protested. "She's my mate. The bond is sacred. I have rights." "You have nothing," Connor interrupted, his tone colder than Madelyn had ever heard it. "You claimed a fraudulent bond with a grieving 19-year-old. You used pack law as a weapon to trap her. You spent 2 years terrorizing her and her daughter. He stood from his throne, and the movement made everyone in the chamber flinch. "And 4 days ago, you assaulted a child under my direct protection. I was trying to reach my mate. She is not your mate." Connor descended the steps, each footfall deliberate. "The moon goddess doesn't bind wolves through fear and violence. What you had was ownership enforced through intimidation, and I'm ending it." He stopped at the edge of the accused circle, and Madelyn saw Thomas finally understand, saw the moment his bravado cracked into real fear. "By the authority granted to me as Alpha King of the Moonstone Pack, inheritor of the crown and keeper of pack law, I invoke supreme Alpha right." Connor's eyes flashed gold, his wolf surging to the surface. "I declare the bond between Thomas Kane and Madelyn Rivers null and void. I strip Thomas Kane of his rank, his position, and his pack membership. He is declared rogue. Effective immediately." Madelyn felt it then, the bond she'd carried like a weight for years, the invisible chain that had bound her to Thomas. It snapped. She gasped, bracing for pain, but instead felt only a rushing sense of freedom so profound it made her dizzy. Gone. It was gone. "Thomas Kane, you are banished from Moonstone territory," Connor continued, his voice absolute and final. "If you return, if you attempt contact with Madelyn Rivers or her daughter, if you speak their names beyond these walls, the sentence is death. No trial, no appeal. Immediate execution." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Do you understand?" Thomas was pale, shaking. "You can't." "I can. I have. It's done." Connor turned to address the full chamber. "Madelyn Rivers and her daughter Diana are under my personal protection. This is not temporary sanctuary. This is permanent. Any threat to them, any attempt to circumvent this decree, any wolf who thinks pack politics or traditional law supersedes my direct command." His voice dropped to something deadly. "That is treason against the crown, and I will treat it as such." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Connor nodded to the guards. "Escort the rogue to the border. He has 1 hour to cross into neutral territory." They dragged Thomas away, his protests fading down the corridor. The council members filed out slowly, shooting glances at Madelyn that ranged from approval to discomfort to grudging respect. Elder Garrett looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but he didn't protest. No one protested, because Connor had invoked a law older than any of them, and made it clear that challenging him meant challenging everything his crown represented. Finally, the chamber emptied until only Connor, Madelyn, Diana, and Marcus remained. "Take Diana to the library," Connor said quietly to Marcus. "We'll be along shortly." Marcus nodded and gently guided Diana away. The girl went reluctantly, looking back at her mother, but Madelyn smiled and nodded. "She's safe now. We're safe." Then it was just the two of them in the vast circular chamber, and Connor was pulling off the crown, setting it aside, shedding the formal robes to reveal the simple black shirt beneath, becoming just a man again instead of a king. "It's done," he said, and she heard the exhaustion beneath the words, the weight of what he'd just done, publicly breaking tradition, setting a precedent that would ripple through pack politics for years. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, too small for what he'd given her. "Connor, He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, carefully, always carefully, mindful of her still healing ribs. "Don't thank me," he murmured against her hair. "I should have done this the moment I saw Diana's bruises. Should have burned the whole system down weeks ago." Madelyn pulled back just enough to see his face. "You did it the right way. Built the case, followed protocol. You only used absolute power when there was no other choice. I would have used it sooner if you'd asked." "I know." And she did. She'd seen it in his eyes that first night. The barely leashed fury, the predator waiting for permission to hunt. "But I needed to choose it." Needed to ask for it myself. Connor's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You're free now. Truly free. The bond is gone. Thomas is gone. You can leave this palace, start over somewhere else if you want. I'll provide whatever resources you need. What if I don't want to leave? The words escaped before Madelyn could second-guess them. Connor went very still. Madelyn, I've been falling for you for weeks, she admitted, her heart hammering. The way you are with Diana, the conversations in the library, the way you've protected us. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. Because you saw us and decided we mattered. She met his amber eyes. I'm not confusing gratitude with feeling. I know the difference. And I'm telling you that He kissed her. Gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His lips were warm against hers, and Madelyn melted into it, into him, into this impossible thing growing between them. When they broke apart, Connor rested his forehead against hers. I haven't felt alive in 80 years, he whispered. Then you and Diana crashed into my life, and suddenly everything meant something again. So what do we do now? Madelyn asked. Connor smiled, real and unguarded. Now we build something new. Together. If you'll have me. Yes, Madelyn breathed. Yes. The full moon hung heavy and silver over the palace gardens, casting everything in ethereal light. Exactly 1 year since Connor had found Diana in his kitchen, since everything had changed. Madelyn stood in the private garden reserved for royal ceremonies, wearing a gown of deep midnight blue that Diana had helped her choose. Simple, elegant, nothing like the forced spectacle her bond with Thomas had been. This ceremony was intimate. Just Marcus, the head healer Ilara, a handful of Connor's most trusted advisors, and Diana standing as witness. Connor waited for her beneath an arch woven with moonflowers, wearing formal robes but no crown. Tonight he wasn't the Alpha King. He was just Connor, choosing her the way she was choosing him. Diana squeezed her hand. You ready, Mama? Madelyn looked at her daughter, 15 now, taller, stronger, the haunted look finally gone from her eyes. Diana trained in defensive combat 3 times a week, excelled in her academic studies, and had started helping Madelyn with the Moonlight Sanctuary program. She'd even testified before the Pack Council last month about the importance of protecting abuse survivors, her voice steady and sure. I'm ready, Madelyn said. They walked together down the short path, and when Connor's eyes met hers, the warmth in them made her breath catch. A year of building this, of learning to trust, of discovering that love could be safety instead of danger. The ceremony was brief, their vows the traditional pack words about loyalty and protection. But when the formal part ended, Connor took her hands and spoke words that were only for her. A year ago, I was a king who ruled alone, he said quietly. I thought strength meant distance, that caring too much made you weak. Then you showed me what real strength looks like. Surviving when giving up would have been easier. Protecting your daughter when you had nothing left to give. Choosing to trust again after every reason not to. His voice roughened. You made me want to be better, not just as a king, but as a man. I promise to spend every day earning the trust you've given me. Madelyn's eyes burned with tears. You already have, she whispered. You saw us when we were invisible. You protected us when we couldn't protect ourselves. You gave me back my freedom and then asked if I'd choose you with it. She squeezed his hands. I choose you, Connor. Every day. Not because I need you to survive, but because I want you in my life. Because you make me believe in love that doesn't hurt. Connor kissed her as the moon reached its apex, and Madelyn felt the new bond snap into place. Nothing like the chain Thomas had forced on her. This was warm, willing, a connection that strengthened rather than constrained. When they broke apart, Connor turned to Diana. "There's one more thing." Diana stepped forward, suddenly nervous, and Connor pulled out a document sealed with the royal crest. "Diana Rivers, by my authority as Alpha King, I formally offer you adoption into the Ashwood bloodline and the title of Princess of the Moonstone Pack. You'll have all the rights, protections, and responsibilities that come with being my daughter." He paused, and Madelyn saw vulnerability flash across his face. "If you'll have me as your father." Diana's composure cracked. "Yes," she breathed, then launched herself at Connor, wrapping her arms around him. "Yes, please." Connor held her carefully, the way he'd learned to over the past year. Gentle but secure, protective without being possessive. When Diana pulled back, she was crying and grinning simultaneously. "Does this mean I have to call you Your Majesty now?" she asked through her tears. Connor's laugh was surprised and genuine. "I'd prefer if you didn't." The small gathering celebrated with wine and moonberry cakes, Marcus making a toast about Connor finally letting someone past his walls, Ilara declaring it the best use of her ceremonial duties in decades. But eventually, the guests departed, leaving the three of them alone in the garden. "Come on," Connor said, taking Madelyn's hand. "There's something I want to show you." He led them through the palace to his private balcony, the one that overlooked the entire territory. The forest stretched out in silvery shadows, and Madelyn could see the lights of the pack town in the distance, the sanctuary house she now managed glowing warm at the edge of the residential quarter. "This is what I see every night," Connor said quietly. 10,000 wolves depending on me to lead them, protect them, make the right choices." He pulled Madelyn against his side, his other arm going around Diana's shoulders. "I used to feel the weight of it like chains, but now you have us to help carry it," Diana finished, leaning into him. Connor smiled. "Now I remember why it matters. I'm not just protecting territory or enforcing laws. I'm protecting families, making sure no one else has to suffer the way you did, building something better." Madelyn looked out over the territory, her territory now, her home, and felt Diana's hand slip into hers. The Moonlight Sanctuary program had helped 8 families in the past 6 months, with 3 more waiting for placement. She'd completed her training in pack administration, learned the laws inside and out, and discovered she had a gift for advocacy that had been buried under years of survival. "I never thought I'd be here," she admitted, standing on the Alpha King's balcony as his mate, watching my daughter become a princess, managing programs that help other survivors. She turned to look at Connor. "A year ago, I was just trying to make it through one more day." "You were never just anything," Connor said firmly. "You were a mother protecting her child with nothing but courage. You were a survivor who refused to break. You were exactly what I needed to remember what strength really means." Diana looked between them, then wrapped her arms around both of them in an awkward 3-way hug. "I love you guys," she said, muffled against Connor's chest. "Both of you, my family." "Our family," Connor corrected gently. Then, after a pause, "You know you can call me Dad if you want. No pressure, but—" "Dad," Diana said immediately, testing the word. Then stronger. "Dad." Connor's eyes shone suspiciously bright in the moonlight. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything. For seeing Mama's bruises and deciding to care. For teaching me that not all men are like Thomas. For—" her voice cracked. "For being the father I always wished I had." Madelyn watched Connor pull her daughter close, saw the fierce protectiveness in every line of his body, and felt the last piece of her broken heart slot back into place. Not healed despite the trauma, but healed because they'd all chosen to build something better from the wreckage. Connor met her eyes over Diana's head, and she saw her own thoughts reflected there. "We made it. Against all odds, we made it." "I spent 80 years ruling alone," Connor thought as he held his family close, the full moon blessing them from above. Thinking strength meant isolation, that caring made you vulnerable, that a king should be untouchable. Then a child showed up in my kitchen at 3 in the morning with bruises on her wrists, and I learned what true strength really looks like. Choosing love even after every reason not to. Protecting not because you're forced to, but because some lives are worth changing everything for. Below them, the territory stretched out peaceful and protected. Above them, the moon goddess watched, and between them, in the circle of Connor's arms, with Diana's laughter and Madelyn's warmth, was everything that mattered. Not a kingdom built on fear and tradition, but a family built on choice, healing, and love that had been earned rather than demanded. Finally, completely, home. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story and where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps us keep creating more stories like this. Until next time, stay safe, stay inspired.